Always Mine by SamadiW. Chapter 14, Part 2. Hermione changed after throwing up again. The constant feeling of nausea was making her weak and tired. Making up her mind to keep her promise to Draco, she was about to head to the hospital wing when a loud knock on the door cut through her thoughts. Ginny smiled brightly and handed her the note Malfoy sent her. Hermione read the note and felt a pull at her heartstrings. He was the one. Ginny took in Hermione's appearance and frowned. She looked awful. He made coffee and sat down on the brightly colored beanbags. Ginny popped a biscuit into her mouth and asked in concern, "How long have you been sick?" Hermione thought back. "About 2 days. Why?" It was about when they had potions and the slippery frog's heart made her almost vomit all over her book. Thank Merlin she controlled herself. Ginny sighed and leaned forward. "I'm not trying to scare you, but you and Malfoy use protection, right?" Hermione laughed incredulously. "Of course we do." But as the words left her mouth, she paled. Her new skin color put Draco's color to shame. She racked her brain, trying to remember her last period. Fuck, she was very late. Very, very late. Fear and unease consumed her. Oh, Merlin, how could she have been so stupid? Leaving Ginny to stare after her, stunned, Hermione rushed to her room and quickly returned with 3 unusual-looking packages. Ginny threw her a curious look, and Hermione explained with a quivering edge to her voice, "Muggle pregnancy strips. I got them when I last visited my parents." She added nervously, "You know, just in case." Taking a deep breath, Ginny gave her a reassuring smile and handed her a test. Hermione took the strip with trembling hands and slowly walked to the bathroom. She didn't know how her legs carried her. Nausea and dizziness slowly consumed her and threatened to engulf her whole. Ginny waited patiently. Absent-mindedly, she picked up a book off the floor and flipped through it. Seconds turned to minutes. It felt like endless hours. Ginny looked up and got to her feet as Hermione exited the room. She knew from her friend's distorted face. The worst had been confirmed. Hermione placed her hand on her abdomen and burst into tears. Narcissa cupped Draco's face. Her eyes searched his for any emotional reaction. His son stared into the distance, defeated and miserable. "I'm sorry. I'm sure Miss Granger is a wonderful girl," Narcissa started to say, but Draco pulled away from his mother's touch, not wanting to talk about Hermione. Leaving his mother, he apparated to Hogsmeade and headed directly to the Hogshead. The bartender approached him cautiously. "Malfoy?" He looked up and said nothing. The look he gave was enough. A dusty bottle of fire whiskey was placed in front of him. Without bothering with the glass, he kept the bottle to his lips and drained it. Hanging his head in despair, Draco recalled his departing conversation with Lucius. "You will sever all ties with the mudblood and publicly court Miss Greengrass." He listened in silence as his father droned out. Lucius pushed his wand tip further into his son's cheek. Draco showed no signs of pain or weakness. He felt numb at what he had to do. Lucius threatened cold-bloodedly. "If you disobey me, your precious love will suffer a fate worse than death." Stepped away from his son, Lucius played with his wand and continued mercilessly. "She's a pretty thing, isn't she?" He leered. "I'm sure plenty would like to have their way with her before I kill her." Draco leapt out of his seat. His fist connected successfully with his father's face, breaking his nose. Blood spurted everywhere. Pure rage shook him where he stood, and he bellowed, "I will kill you if you touch her!" With a flick of Lucius' wand, Draco was back in his seat, writhing in pain. Lucius wiped the blood off his face and angrily stared at his stained black gloves. He spat. Such possessiveness over filthy mudblood. He summoned a house-elf and instructed, "See that my son is cleaned up." Looking at Draco in disgust, Lucius commanded, "Get up and get out of my sight." By the time Draco finished the bottle, he was drunk and unsteady on his feet. He staggered into the dorm. Momentarily blinded by a mane of thick brown hair, he held onto Hermione to steady himself. She held him close to her body shook with the intensity of thought. Fuck, what now? Why was she crying? Draco closed his eyes and thought one last time. He pulled her close, buried his face in her hair, and inhaled deeply. "My love." Hermione sobbed into his shirt. "I was so worried when you didn't return yesterday." Her fingers stuck into the material of his shirt, and she asked in concern, "Is everything okay?" Draco broke away from her embrace, took a deep breath to compose himself, and spat. "Of course everything is all right, Granger. I went to visit my parents. They would hardly hurt me." I didn't mean anything, Draco." Hermione almost apologized. He glared pointedly. "Get off my fucking bag!" Hermione opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. It was unlike him to snap at her over something silly and trivial. He rubbed the back of his neck. "I am going to sleep." He watched him walk away without looking back and breaking her heart into pieces. Hermione touched her stomach and hot tears rolled down her face. How could she tell him he would be a father when he was being so cruel? She hardly slept, tossing and turning till the early morning hours until exhaustion consumed her near dawn. When Hermione finally rose, she found that Draco had already left. Something was very wrong. She felt it in her gut. She got dressed miserably and went down to the great hall for breakfast. Ginny, Harry, and Ron were already there, chatting among themselves. She slid in next to Ginny, who squeezed her hand gently, glimpsed at a southern table, and whispered, "Did you tell him?" Hermione shook her head sadly. "Something's wrong with him." They both looked over to the southern table just in time to see Draco grab Astoria and heatedly kiss her in front of everyone. The hall stilled with silence. Students stared at the exchange, and some braved a look at the stunned Gryffindors. He deepened the kiss, keeping his eyes fixed on Hermione. Astoria closed hers and moaned in pleasure. Ginny stared at Malfoy in disbelief and disgust. Ron and Harry stared at Hermione, concern written all over their faces. Many students were trying to figure out what happened. Even Blaise and Theo looked over at Hermione in concern. Hermione got to her feet, ignoring Ginny. She held her head high, grabbed her bag full of books, and fled the hall. She refused to cry and give him fucking satisfaction. Anger was a better emotion, and she let it take over. Ron threw Malfoy a look of pure smugness and hurriedly followed Hermione out of the great hall. Draco let Astoria go and pushed her aside roughly. He was no longer the audience he needed and preferred not to spend a second more than he had to with his so-called betrothed. Frowning on Astoria, Draco stared down. "I know what you did, you heartless bitch. You think I will ever love you?" He spat venomously, looking her over. "I am doing this because I love Hermione. You will never be anything more than an annoyance to me." He sneered. "Yes, I will marry you, and we will both be fucking miserable." Hot tears ran down Astoria's petite face as she listened to him. Draco watched Weasley run after Hermione, and anger spat through him like wildfire. He cracked his knuckles. Maybe Weasley would give him an outlet to release his pent-up rage. He got to his feet with the rest of the houses, heading to their last week of classes. Blaise and Theo tried to speak to Draco, but he stubbornly dismissed them and waved them off. When they rounded a corner, he saw Ron pressing flush against Hermione and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Words of comfort and reassurance flowed out of his fucking mouth. Draco didn't hesitate. That was the outlet he needed. Before Blaise could hold him back, he marched up to the unsuspecting duo and physically assaulted the red-headed Gryffindor. Draco's uppercut found its mark and sent Ron flying backward. Taking out his wand, he pointed it directly at Ron, trying to inflict more damage, but he heard another familiar soft voice. A voice that called out his name, moaned his name. He barely had time to turn around. Hermione hexed him effortlessly, her eyes burning with rage. Stupefy! Blaise helped Draco onto the black leather couch in the headstorm. He asked at once impatiently, "What the bloody hell is going on?" Draco kept quiet. Blaise was his oldest friend. He knew about his father. He decided to confide in his best friend. They had been friends since they were 3 years old. They both knew each other's families, and if anyone could understand his predicament, it would be Blaise. Head in his hands, Draco replied miserably, "My fucking father happened. He's threatened to kill Granger if I don't end things with her and marry Astoria." Blaise let out a slow whistle. "Well, mate, can't say I'm surprised. My stepfather's a fucking lunatic, but he looks like Babbity Rabbity compared to your father." He shook his head and leaned forward. "You knew this would happen. Did you expect anything else?" Drac closed his eyes in despair. "I know, but I didn't fucking plan on falling in love with Granger." Blaise nodded understandably. "I know, mate. I know." They sat silently until Blaise asked, "What will you do?" Draco ran his fingers through his hair. "I have to let her go. It will kill her and possibly my mother if I don't." His voice cracked with emotion at the realization of letting Hermione go. Blaise nodded and got up to leave, but Draco stopped him and hissed, "This stays between us." Blaise smiled at his best friend and patted him on the shoulder. "I will keep the best of your secret. I'm here if you need me." Draco sat back and waited for Hermione. Ginny squeezed Hermione's hand for the 10th time. She played with a blade of grass and sat with Ginny and Harry by the leg. The tears fell freely, and she clumsily wiped them away. She couldn't believe what was happening. Her world was falling apart. What happened to Draco? He was breaking her heart into an infinite number of pieces. Harry spoke up, confident in his assessment. "You said he went home. I bet all this has something to do with that." He added bitterly, "His father is a complete maniac, Hermione. We all know that." She quietly digested what Harry said. Unable to hold it in any longer, Hermione blurted out, "I'm pregnant, Harry." Harry stared at his best friend in disbelief and then at Ginny, who purposely averted her gaze. He sighed. Of course Ginny would have known. The situation at hand was far more complex than he originally thought. Reaching over, he put his arm around Hermione's shoulders and hugged her. He kissed her forehead and advised sternly, "You have to tell him." Hermione nodded miserably. Fuck. Life was about to get very complicated. Hermione entered the dorm to find Draco casually sitting on the couch sipping a butterbeer. He looked up as she entered and glared sternly. "Finally been off with Weasley, have you?" He mocked sarcastically. "It didn't take you long to fucking move on." She composed herself and held her head high. "I will not dignify that with an answer." Narrowing her eyes, she spat. "But maybe I should ask why the fuck you kiss Astoria in the middle of the Great Hall." Draco grinned. "She is my fiancée. Why wouldn't I kiss her?" Hermione felt dizzy. She steadied herself and stared at him in disbelief. She mustered all her strength and yelled, "Don't fucking patronize me, Malfoy!" She closed the distance between them and poked him in the chest. You return after visiting your father and suddenly she's your fiancée? Her voice cracked. Where the hell does that leave me? He laughed. Come off it, Granger. I'm a Malfoy. Did you think I would marry you and bring shame to my house? I am a fucking Malfoy! He screamed in her face. Refusing to back down, she answered slowly. I heard you. But are you trying to convince yourself or me? Hermione looked deep into his conflicted eyes. They never ceased to amaze her. She placed her palm on his chest, felt his heart rapid beating, and pleaded. Please, please tell me what's happened. Is it your father? Let me help you. He swept her hand away and took a deep breath. It's over. Draco turned to walk away. Glancing over his shoulder, he saw the tears fall down her wizened and stunned face. His heart broke, and he itched to take back every word he uttered, but he reminded himself of the greater danger that loomed over her. He collapsed against the door inside his room and banged his head over and over against the hard frame. He repeated the same words again and again. I will always love you. Hermione didn't know how she made it to the Gryffindor common room, but she stood there like an emotionless statue as everyone moved around her. They watched her in caution and concern. Blurry images moved around her. Were they even real? A shrill voice caught through the animated chatter of the ghost storm. Ginny heard her name being called and Parvati rushing towards her in panic. Parvati came to a halt, struggled to catch her breath, and gasped. It's Hermione! Something's wrong with her! Dropping her things immediately, Ginny hurriedly ran after Parvati to the common room. Hermione stood there with vacant expression. Ginny approached her slowly and placed a hand on her shoulder. The broken girl turned to face her. It's over, Gin. He left me. I couldn't tell him. To say it out loud made the bitter realization of the situation sink in. Unable to hold back the violent surge of emotions, Hermione broke down in sobs and fell to the floor. Ginny tightly hugged her best friend's broken frame. It's going to be all right, darling. You have us, and we're going to get through this. Harry and Ron entered the common room covered in mud after Quidditch practice. They saw Hermione first. She was hunched over a mug of hot chocolate. Discarding their equipment, they curiously approached the girls, and it was fairly obvious that something was out of place. Ginny locked eyes with Harry. Her eyes were strained with concern. Glancing momentarily at Hermione, she shook her head. Harry felt pure rage as he dropped everything, rushed out of the portrait and headed straight for the headstorm. He had Ginny call after him, but he didn't care to stop. He banged on the dorm room until a completely broken-down Malfoy opened the door, looking a mess. He left the door open for Harry to enter, returned to his bottle of fire whiskey, and mocked. What took you so long, Potter? Harry stared at Malfoy. His appearance and behavior were not of a man who willingly ended a relationship. He looked, if possible, worse than Hermione. Harry felt his anger die. He rounded on the blonde Slytherin. What the fuck have you done, Malfoy? When he didn't answer, Harry pulled out his wand and pointed it at him. Draco eyed the wand with no interest. He just stared at it. No smug expression. Malfoy didn't even attempt to take his wand out. Instead, he drank from the bottle and spat. It's over, Potter. Take care of your friend. Harry felt the anger return. He demanded, Did she mean so little to you? Draco flinched at the harshness of Harry's words, but replied carelessly, She was just a good shag. It was good while it lasted, but Malfoy can't be with a mudblood. That's your father talking, not you. Harry replied coldly. Draco threw the empty bottle at the wall. It smashed and fell to the ground in pieces. He rounded on Harry and bellowed, Don't you fucking get it, Potter? I'm letting her go so she can live. He pointed at the door. Get out before I fucking throw you out.
I am done with Hermione Granger.
Harry wanted to curse Malfoy into oblivion, but his last words were disturbing and struck him as odd. There was definitely more to the story. He was more convinced than ever that Lucius Malfoy had gotten to his son. Harry entered the Gryffindor common room and knelt next to Hermione. She smiled at him weakly. He cupped her face tenderly.
We love you, and we will get through this together.
Ron walked over and took in Hermione's defeated figure. He couldn't bring himself to say anything but agree with Harry. He smiled at him gratefully and felt her eyes close.
Malfoy's a fucking git,
Ron hissed as he removed his dirty Quidditch robes. Harry looked over at his friend.
I don't think this was easy for him to do.
He pressed urgently.
There's something else going on.
Ron ignored him and said in relief,
It's good that she got away from him before things got worse.
Harry nodded solemnly. Ron had no idea about Hermione's current predicament. To be continued. Thank you for listening to this chapter of Always Mine by SamadiW. If you would like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Spotify, or AO3.